Hello everyone, welcome back to FreezeME, and this time we're going to World 3, the final real world and my personal favorite. It's also the world that's the most like Mario's, so that may have something to do with it. Don't get any ideas about us being near the end of the game though, we're not even close. Welcome to the central island of Giant Bit's Islands, and the one we'll be spending the least amount of time on. It is where our first golden cube is located though. We just gotta make our way up these bouncing platforms. There's not exactly any tricky or complicated platforming in this part, save for at the very start, where we have to make our way across this narrow wooden log. But we can jump across the entire thing instead of even touching it. And now for the main gimmick of this mission, we look at the sign, we see which squares need lit up, and then we light those squares up without touching any of the others. I'm sure you've seen this mechanic somewhere before, but hey, it adds variety to the game, and this game is all about that variety. So now it's the same thing, but this time there are enemies on the blocks. Thankfully the enemies can't change the colors of the blocks. They're just there to make it harder to step on the ones we need to. And this last one, as you might have guessed, is the toughest, not because of the block placement, but because there are now two enemies to chase us around. However, they have a ton of goofy animations that make them really easy to jump over. They take forever to chase you, is what I'm saying. And now we have a clear shot at the golden cube. Well, it's time to venture off the main island and onto, well, this green grass-covered pipe over here. This pipe, like a lot of things in this world, has gravity attached to it, so it's very hard to jump off, and we can move all around it. The reason we're on this pipe, though, is for this screw. And now that we have it, we can actually leave the main island. There are only a few other islands to visit, but they are decently large, all things considered, even if they're not quite the size of an entire world themselves. The islands also have such strong gravity that it's pretty much impossible to ever fall off in any circumstance. Their spherical nature really only affects the camera angle and general perception, but that's better than nothing, really. We're gonna try and aim this thing so we land on one of those circular platforms, because if we land in the quicksand, or the sand as it is, we will die. Because we can't jump out of it and we will drown. So in order to get the golden cube this time, we have to freeze both of these moving crystals that are holding the golden cube in place. And we have to freeze them both really quickly before the other one unfreezes. Thankfully, we have a pretty ridiculous jump, as I just demonstrated, so it's not all that hard. The hard part is not accidentally landing in the quicksand while you're jumping and having to restart the level. But because I was just so good at the game, we don't have to worry about that. You saw that correctly, this time we are heading toward the ice island. Much less dangerous than the desert island because there's nothing on the island's surface that will just flat out kill us. The island is still kind of difficult to navigate though because, well, it's all slippery and your momentum is really screwed up on the ice unless you're sliding. We're going to activate this teleporter so that way we don't have to use the catapult to get here anymore, and underneath this bouncy platform is another screw. In case it's not obvious, the screws are in kind of painful places. And if you didn't know where they were ahead of time, you would be searching for a very long time to find them. The reason we're climbing up here is so we can get a better view of everything around us, so that way I can find the ice structure we're looking for. As I said, the spherical surface of the islands does definitely affect the perception in camera, so it can be difficult to find out exactly where you're supposed to go. Before we get to the ice structure though, we want to hop inside this igloo real quick. Yep, it's another heart. The first one since the very beginning of the game, in fact. You may be wondering if we missed a heart container back in the last world, and we did, but we couldn't have gotten it yet. We need a power-up for that. Anyway, with that heart container out of the way, it is now time to actually find our way to the ice structure. And yeah, I successfully remembered where it was. There's an ice block in the middle of the structure that we can push out either side, and depending on which side we push it out of, we gain access to a different part of the structure. Fortunately, I know which side we want to push it out of first, because we do want to access one part before the other. There are of course also little bars, so that way you can't push the ice block onto the planet's surface and send it sliding, thus rendering the mission unplayable. Hey, it's this guy. You know what we do with this guy, we've done it twice with him already. It's all he's good for, really, besides killing Logalo. He helped with that a bit. That switch removed a block that would have hindered our ascent up the other side of the structure. So now we can push the ice block to the other side and get our way to the golden cube. There's nothing particularly challenging about this mission aside from figuring out what to do, and there is a bit that stumped me. Also, this jump right here can be kinda harrowing, because it's such a small place to land. But we'll have much worse jumps very shortly. And by very shortly, I mean in the next video. It is time for perhaps the least impressive of all the islands, but I think it's super cute and I really dig its atmosphere. In order to get there, we're going to have to go to the ice island first. Because we can't aim toward this new island from the main one. It's just not possible to turn the catapult that far. Thankfully, the ice catapult's got us covered. Without the screws we picked up, we wouldn't have been able to fix it though. So the spherical nature doesn't apply to this island, in case you couldn't tell. As the introduction to the also here's a teleporter. As the introduction to the mission might have told you, our job is to swim inside the pipes underneath the island. Or rather, in the island. The pipes are something of a maze, and you can spend quite a while getting lost in there, and I assume that's where the challenge of the mission is meant to come from. But I've long since memorized exactly which pipe to go into and exactly where the switch is, so that way we won't get lost at all. Also, touching these air bubbles does refill our air. I am grateful they are so numerous, because if we had to keep resurfacing, that would be painful. And the controls for swimming are challenging enough by themselves. Here's the switch, and after we manage to actually press it, yep, there's the golden cube. There is also another screw somewhere in this maze, but it's not at all necessary to get it, so we're not even going to bother looking for that one. I do appreciate the small effort in incorporating the swimming mechanics into the main gameplay. I mean, it's one thing to be able to swim, but actually having an objective that requires you to swim is much nicer. It is time for probably the second hardest mission in all of FreezeME. And it's because we're headed back to the desert planet. I think this is only the second time we've been here, and it's quite a chore to navigate. Because if you misstep and fall in the quicksand, then you're dead and you have to restart. Thankfully, our objective isn't that far off. There are also, of course, the helpful signs, as always, to point us in the right direction. Sometimes these signs aren't so helpful, especially on this world, but in this case they do a decent job. And when you start to see the giant clock in the horizon, you know you're headed in the right direction for sure. Now, the reason this in particular is so difficult is because the 20 coins spawn on these moving platforms around the center. So not only do you have to keep constant watch on the timer and refreeze it whenever it's about to unfreeze, you have to watch out for dying from the quicksand, and you have to be able to freeze these moving platforms at the optimal time to get all the coins. It's pretty tough. It is also possible, as I successfully attempt here, to grab the coins without first freezing the platform, but then you run the risk of sinking into the sand right below the platform, so it's probably better to freeze them. The moving platforms themselves are really fun to platform on. This whole situation is really tense and interesting and makes for, challenging platforming, which is something this game has in small, quick bursts. And I have no complaints about how all of this is set up in theory. Because I like the way it splits your attention, I like the way you always have to be on your toes, have to move as quickly as possible, and platform with precision and expertise. The only thing I don't like is that if you fuck up and fall in the quicksand, you have to restart the entire level. Yes, that does include making your way all the way back to the clock every time. And it's not fun after the 5th or 6th time you try. Aside from that, it's really well designed, and it makes great use of the freezing mechanic in a way that not a lot of the game does. So I like it. Oh yeah, as the mission title said, this is also going to be the very last time we race against the clock. And, well, it's quite a doozy compared to the first two, isn't it? I mean, the second one was a little challenging, but nowhere near this challenging. But we are at the final real world, so things can't get much more difficult from here, right? 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 It's time to visit the desert planet a third time, this time for the race against Piggleton. The race against Piggleton does not take place on the desert planet, but that is where Piggleton lives. Just like there was a final clock battle, this is also the final race. And just like the clock battle here was the hardest, this is also the hardest race, but it's not nearly as hard. Let's not get carried away here, it's still a very easy race. I think this is the last time we're going to visit the desert planet in the video, but it's still a good idea to turn on the teleporter next to Piggleton's house, just in case we had to come back here for some weird reason. You know, like to touch all these pig coins and talk to all those pigs standing around, and just mess with all this stuff that we don't even look at while we're trying to get the golden cubes. But that might just be silly. We are now on the racetrack, so all we need to do is find the statue of Piggleton and we can get this thing started. Carefully find the statue of Piggleton without running into the buzzsaws. So just as with the previous races, our slide is the key, but we can't slide nearly as haphazardly because of the way the track is laid out. The addition of the gravity mechanics means it's way easier to lose control and careen into one of these walls or a buzzsaw, and Piggleton moves way faster in this race than in the others. So this race is all about more controlled slide jumping, which, to be fair, isn't that hard. It might even be easier than the more haphazard slide jumping. This time it's back to the ice planet for a much quicker bit of platforming than before. And of course we did activate the teleporter on the ice planet, so we're going to use that instead of the catapult. The objective we're looking for is in a rather small area, so you might think it would be hard to spot, but it does have a giant golden cube on the top of it. So that aids in our search a little bit. The platforming required to get said golden cube might be a bit challenging if we weren't planning to exploit the hell out of it, which we absolutely are. It should only take a quick slide jump to skip straight to our goal. It is time to head back to the beach island, this time for a really easy golden cube that just involves a bit of simple math. As I said back in the first video, one of the things I like most about Mario is its gimmicks, and this is a very gimmicky golden cube we're after right now. We have to stop these hands so that they match up to add 11. And that's pretty easy. All we really need is 5 and 2 3s, and the hands are in such a position that it's pretty easy to do that before they unfreeze. Even if you goof up and they do unfreeze, you can just do it again. It's not like there's any real consequence to it. Of course, the golden cube doesn't just appear because we added some things correctly. We have to do a small bit of platforming, and I do mean a small bit. It is time for our third, but not final boss battle of FreezeME. And this one is my favorite because it is the most Mario of all the boss fights. We cannot teleport to the boss, we need to access it via the catapult on the ice island, just like the way we accessed the beach island the first time. Spidley here is a unique boss, and he has my favorite mechanic out of all the bosses. We can't hurt him just by freezing him. We have to change that smiley face on his butt into a shocked face. And when that happens, now we can hurt him. Part of the challenge in this boss comes from the fact that Spidley runs after us rather quickly after we damage him. If we get our bearings in time, though, we can freeze him before he has a chance to do anything. After we hit him 3 times, I believe he changes phases. And this should be the 3rd. Now his back is on fire, which means it's impossible for us to jump over him to reach his butt, but we could have done that previously. Now we are required to take the time to move around, which is what we were doing in the first place because I knew this phase was coming. But if you were relying on jumping on top of him to reach his butt, then maybe this phase would be quite challenging. It's still not exactly a super difficult boss, and if you're ever in danger you can just jump on the outside circle over here. But I really like the gimmick anyway.